Hello again and welcome to our video interview for session 4, in which we're exploring the love between a husband and a wife as looked at by Pope Francis in The Joy of Love. And to do that, I'm joined by Bishop Alan McGuckian of the Diocese of Raphoe. Bishop Alan, the Pope may not be married, but I think it's fair to say there's a lot of wisdom in what he is writing about married love, and very down to earth as well. I mean, he talks about things like it's true to say, he'll say, that we all have a desire for, a love that lasts, for fidelity, commitment, things like that.
I think it's obvious when you know about Pope Francis that he loved growing up in the family that he grew up in. He had a tremendous appreciation of his father, of his mother, of his granny, I think especially, and the other members of the family. And then when you look at the other things that he has written, Pope Francis, I just find, always speaks to my life. Like when I read his stuff, it will be theological, it will be very profound, but I always find this is real. And I know that married people, as well as people like me who are parts of families without being married, when we read Amoris Laetitia, it just sounds real.
Because he does talk about the ideals, which is that it would be lifelong commitment, and then he says, but that may need to be renewed each time because people are living longer, or he talks about the stresses and strains that can come into family life, or just in loving another person.
I think the whole thing is very grounded. He sees the Christian life, the whole Christian life, as a lifelong process. And that will be true of your life as a married person, however long or short it is. And God is there all the time to be discerned, and the presence of God to be discerned. And there will be troughs and there will be high points. And it does have to be renewed, and that idea of maybe even renewing every day. But certainly there will be times when married couples have to face themselves again, be honest with one another, and maybe can even formally renew their love for each other.
And part of the thing that keeps people going through those troughs and the ups and the downs of the challenge of living with another human being, day and daily, is sexual love. And he speaks a lot about that in very positive tone.
Well, I think the positive tone is really powerful. In every culture, in every age, there is the possibility that we will see life in very dualistic terms, where the spirit is good and the body is bad, and sex can be something to be suspect. And Francis speaks so powerfully of us as embodied human beings. When you think of it, the very first thing we hear about marriage in the scriptures, God said, it is not good for Adam, for the man to be alone. So we have this sense that marriage is, in a sense, first and foremost, the gift of a man to a woman, of a woman to a man, that they have companionship with one another. And that is a human companionship. They are a man and a woman, therefore it will be sexual. So sexuality is in the service of this profoundly sacred companionship, and it is of course good. And that comes out so clearly in Francis's writing.
Yeah, because you see, I think in the past, really the impression was that virginity was a higher state. If you were celibate or virgin, and then, well, okay, we'll tolerate it if you have to be married and it's not that bad. Whereas he does away with that hierarchy altogether, and in fact, speaks eloquently about how a married love is the image of God's love for us as well.
That's right, but I mean, that is there in St. Paul as well. St. Paul uses the love of a husband and wife as the image of Christ's love for his church. Like whatever about that dualism that will creep in, and not only to the Christian tradition, whatever about it there in the heart of Christianity from the very beginning, there is a profound sense. Remember, ours is a religion of the Incarnation, where the Word became flesh. And we will never be undone by that temptation to see the body as bad. There's so much in our tradition that affirms the goodness of the body, albeit we struggle with it, and it's a struggle that's there. It keeps on reasserting itself, that struggle does. But Francis is very powerful on it.
It does, and It is, in a way, it's a countercultural thing, because he does talk then about the notion of beauty, and he talks about, like, people get older and they mightn't think they're as attractive, or they mightn't be seen to be as attractive, and that's what modern culture does, commodifies, and then as you get older, like, you're pushed out to the side, Hollywood actress, whatever. And then he talks about the need to go below that. And you know, the call to see the beauty that's in everybody, that it's a deeper vision of the person than just the bodily superficial as well.
It is, but I mean, this is a deep understanding of human sexuality, which can so easily be commodified, and is commodified. You know, where the sexual relationship, just like so much else, is something where you own, where you possess. This is not. There is a vision here of sexuality that is other-centered. And
he acknowledges that even in St. Paul, like that famous piece where it's often used at weddings, or not used anymore, women be subject to your husbands. Like, he takes that and he singles that out and talks about that, and saying that sexuality and sex must never be used as a weapon or as any form of domination. For its own mutuality and equality. And just, I think, for people to read that in very straightforward language is very heartening.
It is. No, it really is. And then the other thing that he reminds us, that marriage is always fruitful. It is always open to new life. You know, and he calls us to that, and says that in our Catholic tradition, this radical openness to new life that you find, and he refers to the maybe elsewhere to the prophetic nature of the Catholic tradition and Humanae Vitae. He says, we want young people to be open to life, and encourage them to, young married couples, encourage them to be open to big families. Big families are a joy. And there's no room for being self-centered in a vision of the world that says, let's be open, let us welcome the other, and let us welcome new life.
And he also does say that marriage, nonetheless, is not solely for procreation. So he holds that space as well for, you know, the fruitfulness that can come in other ways as well as children.
Absolutely, and I mean, we have seen that so well. And fruitfulness, I think, is the key for understanding this. I can think of couples I know who in God's providence didn't have children, whose married life is eminently fruitful in the way they are there for the rest of their family, for the wider family, in the way people are there in their parish, in their diocese, in society, and a genuine fruit of that married love bond between them.
He is clear about that the Christian vision of marriage is a covenant. Like, it's not just a marriage, but it is a marriage before God, and therefore, because it is before God and it is a commitment in that way, that whilst it will inevitably, if it's a human marriage, go through its difficulties and challenges, children die, illnesses, all the things, unemployment, all of those things, that nonetheless, he says there is a grace that's available, that was there at the day of marriage and is there to be called on for people, that makes it different, that there's another greater vision and power sustaining people in that married life and in family life.
That's right. But I mean, when Francis talks about the joy of the gospel, he is not talking about something, joy is not something superficial. Joy is something deep that comes because of the presence of Christ in our hearts, and the presence of Christ between a man and a woman who have committed themselves to one another in marriage. And that, he calls us to believe and to lean on that and know that it will sustain us with joy, even in times of great sorrow.
Yeah, he talks about the two types of joy. There's one, I think he gives that lovely example of the film Babette's Feast, and he also quotes in the Gospel where he says, give, take and treat yourself well. So it's a lovely quote to have. The other thing that strikes me about this is, given that grace that's there, given the importance of the parental love for their children, he does stress that children are loved. They're loved not to be mini adults, but to grow up into being their own people as well.
A large part of the love between a husband and a wife is that it creates an environment where new little people can grow. And in the family they learn they learn how to love, they learn how to forgive, they learn to be forgiven, they learn how to pray. And it just in that family environment, and it's so important that we speak about this, that we must be able to call new generations of families to be places of prayer, where faith is a living reality, and where children learn about God and learn about faith and learn how, and this happens slowly over time with patience.
And it is hard, because many families and many people who are, say, my generation, or who've been brought up in the Catholic faith, and yet by the time they're 14 or 15, the children are rebelling and they're saying, I don't want to know about it, and all the ensuing things that goes on. They're living in a culture that doesn't support, say, the way we would have kneel down and say the rosary. Like, you just can't do that anymore. It won't happen. And I think there's a realism in that, in what he's writing about, that is there, that there is that challenge, because he does talk about the influence then will come from how the parents or parent lives their lives. That is often what is picked up, rather than maybe formally saying, sit down and read the gospel.
I know a family where the children who are pretty much grown at this stage, who don't go to Mass anymore, and that's a sadness. But on Christmas Day, the children go with their parents to a homeless shelter to share dinner with the people in the homeless shelter before going home to have their own Christmas dinner. Now, if that's not a good Catholic family, I don't know what is.
And that's another point I think that he makes, that the family is not about an enclosed nuclear unit. The family that is respected in this way, with their parents reared in the Catholic faith, is a family that with the same love opens out. And he talks about the Eucharist being mystical, but he says we mustn't forget the Eucharist, the justice of the Eucharist, that a family then ends up going out to be people in the world who are agents of change.
Well, the very first day after his election, Pope Francis spoke about a church that was missionary, a church that does not turn on itself, that doesn't sit in the sacristy getting sick. You know, he wants it out of the sacristy, out on the streets. Well, the family is the domestic church. Okay, so a family, just the exact same image, the family that is turned in on itself will get sick. And maybe that, maybe there's something about that, but a family is meant to be moving out. And like, children are meant to go up and grow away, which of course is one of the stages of family. There are so many stages that couples have to prepare for, and one of them, like we could talk about the earlier ones, but one of them is when the children go away. So there is a real letting go that is missionary, but it's teaching the children that the love that's in this home, in this Christian home, is not self-centered; it is other-centered.
And it is hard. It is hard to live in a committed relationship of fidelity for all of your life with the things that are thrown at people. I think it's really important that is acknowledged, and that it's remembered that we do need help to do this, and that help is also from the wider parish, the wider community.
That's right, and I think we have to see our communities more and more as places in which we're all on a journey, on a lifelong journey. And because I think you make a good point that we're living longer, the journey it's over in a flash as well. But there are all these stages in it, and we have to learn to be patient and to discern God's will. Discernment is this big word that Francis is inviting us into. We have to discern God's presence in the new phases that will emerge, and sometimes they will be very challengingly, certainly on the surface, very challenging at the start. But I mean, this joy of the gospel is that God is with us at every stage, even very much including old age.